this is the agenda for today with a brief introduction from me and Claudia Amabile from PDC. We will illustrate the gap analysis on data management and predictive modeling that we prepared in view of this meeting. And then we will go ahead with a series of talks from our 4 speakers, and the goal is to go into the details of the gap analysis and start to provide experiences and solutions to the barriers identified. At the end, we will have a discussion session. We will use an online whiteboard system that is called Mural. You will find the link in your chat later on, and we will divide people in breakout rooms. This is our idea. Let's see at the end, we can even change depending on the overall number of participants. And there you will be able to ask comments to speakers and provide your experiences as you like. So 7 projects that joined forces for this workshop. We have 6 of them that are dealing with material research, developing different type of materials, biocoating for resistant materials, flame retardants, again, plasticizers, surfactants, coatings, again, surfactants for many different types of applications. And if you look at the column on the right, you can see that we are applying different types of data analytics methods, tools, and practices for different purposes. And then there's a last project that is called Data for Circ. They are more focused on data and data analytics as such, and with the goal to develop a data-driven AI-assisted digital framework and looking more into detail at different aspects of data analytics, including the development of digital product passports for products. So overall, data analytics is mainly used to inform research activities, safe and sustainable assessment, techno-economic analysis, system and process modeling, and optimization. So our question is, what are the pros and cons and how to make the best use of data analytics? This is what we want to discuss today and the reason why we are here. So I would now give the floor to our colleague Claudia Amabile that will briefly present you some of the elements of our first initial analysis. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea, very much, and thank you all the attendants for joining this workshop and co-organizing projects. So first of all, we are going to introduce the topic of today's workshop, which is the gaps, challenges, and opportunities in data analytics in collaborative research. I would say that first of all, it's important to understand why this topic is relevant. So in collaborative research in European projects, we generate large amount of data. And at the moment the data is generated, it is raw, unprocessed, and non-documented. So while it can be easy to the people that generate the data to understand it will be much more difficult to other partners to access the data, share the data, and reuse the data, or to interpret it, for example. In these projects, we are working together through a common objective, so it's very important that this procedure is facilitated. Next slide, please. So this can be done through a proper data management, which helps to answer some very basic though important questions, like, for example, who owns the data, who can access the data, how do we ensure data quality so that the data is accurate, complete, and consistent. How can the data be reused without being misinterpreted, for example? How is protected against unauthorized access? And how can we ensure compliance with the relevant regulations or with the FAIR principles that will be introduced in the next slides? Next slide, please. So this allows to basically increase the value of the data sets that we generated, because it's not just about generating the data, but transferring the knowledge that we can gain from that. So we can see, for example, that going from raw unstructured data to fully FAIR compliant data, the value that we can obtain increases significantly. Next slide, please. So in the process of giving value to the data, we have to add another important pillar, which is the data analytics. In this case, we call it, we summarize it with the term predictive modeling. So we can see the the process as a workflow that goes all the way from generating the data to translating this data into impact. This is based on these two main pillars, which are data management and predictive modeling. And at each step, we are basically adding value to the data. So first, the data is collected, created, documented, stored, and shared with partners. And then it can be fed into models, which can be statistical, AI, or machine learning models, in order to translate the information gained into insights and also helping informing decisions. Next slide, please. So these two pillars have something in common. We can say a shared asset, which is the quality of the data that is being generated. This means that trustworthy data, well-documented, secure, and fair compliant can also be fed into these predictive models and return information that is valuable. When translating this process into practice, of course, there are some challenges that need to be addressed. So what we did in the previous months with the co-organizing partners is to identify some macro categories of gaps and then making sub-lists of short lists of different gaps based on our experiences in our project. I will briefly go through them because our experts will give talks only on few of these topics because it's a very long list. So we can divide it in gaps for data management and analytics and also distinguish between technical failures or technical gaps and organizational gaps. For example, when we talk about data management, what can be a technical failure in terms of gathering and reporting, which is the first macro category, is the awareness and motivation that people have in facing this task in the project. Normally, this is perceived as high time consuming, also not very fun task, let's say. People also, according to our experience, lack understanding of the core terminologies. For example, what is metadata and why it is important to assign to a data set. Also, the vocabularies that are used are fragmented, so there is no organic and coherent approach to the sharing of the data. Next slide, please. The second macro category is called data analysis and is related to how the data is made interoperable. For example, if there is a proprietary software, normally the formats are locked, so other people cannot access it. And it becomes very difficult, for example, if there is no standardized format to reuse data because it needs to be translated first into another format. So this becomes very time consuming. And last but not least, the use of the results, because if data is not well documented, the risk of misuse of the data is very high. If there is no tracking of the version, for example, there is the risk that a previous version is utilized instead of the last one that is made available for partners. Next slide, please. So regarding the governance failure in data management, basically we are talking about lack of resources. Normally there are minimal resources allocated to this task. Next slide, please. And lack of process and planning regarding to the task. So basically proactive operation in data management. Regarding data analytics, we have basically the same macro categories, but of course the short list is different. For example, in this case, when we talk about data gathering and reporting, we refer to the fact that when we fed models with data, if there are inconsistencies, for example, among data sets in terms of units, then this inconsistency is also found in the results that the model will give. So it becomes basically mathematically meaningless. Also, the preprocessing of the data can be inconsistent. This means that, for example, sometimes there is a transformation applied to the data set and it is not reported. So the risk is that we train a model on the data, which are not the physical signal, but a transformation of the data itself. For the analysis of the data in this case, we mean that if there is a biased data set, the bias can be propagated. For example, if experiment A is performed on the basis of experiment B, the risk that we have downstream the same error that we had upstream is very high. There is also risk for synthetic data, which are generated because normally there are hidden layers between in these generated models, and also about how the data, the results are used. So we need people that are expert in the field and can actually understand if the results of the modeling is physically meaningless or not. So it can happen, for example, that there is conflicting evidence between two models, A and B, and then we need efficient validation techniques to understand the validity of the results. So these are the main topics that Andrea summarized. I think, Andrea, you can explain the...
We just took the elements and the issues that Claudia just presented. We put them in 2 slides, one on data management and one on predictive modeling. And these will be are available already on the mural. You can access through the email we sent, and I think the link will be sent now in the chat. So you can already enter the system, and if you like, you can already put comments, but this will be done then as well in the discussion session. So this is the hierarchy for data management, and this one is for predictive modeling. So that said, what we will do next? So we will have the talks. We'll then have 5 minutes to access the mural and introduce first comments, ideas, questions, and then we will go with the breakout rooms, and there you can do a lot of things. You can ask questions, address questions, provide your experiences, just listen to the discussion. And we will assign you randomly in the rooms. The duration of each group would be roughly 20-25 minutes. Let's see how things will go ahead. So that said, what we will do next, this I will show you also at the end, but I just want to anticipate. We will circulate the slides of the event. We will prepare and circulate a brief white paper based on the outcomes of the workshop. This is part of the activities that bythe has got to do, but we'll try to do it jointly with the other projects. We can do follow-up events upon interest and requests by projects and participants, and we will remain, all of us, open to cooperate on future data analytics activities and initiatives. So now we can go to the talks. Here, Tassos, then Bythe, then Vincent, then Alvaro, where we'll address different aspects of our discussion. So I would give the floor to Tassos for his presentation. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's workshop. As we all know, it's a very significant topic that we all address, no matter where we come from or what we want to achieve. And one key thing that we need to remember is that in many cases, cooperative research and actually cooperative work happens everywhere. So that this is something that we actually need to make sure that works correctly. And then we have a strong foundation to achieve what we are looking to achieve and what we want to deliver, either as an organization or as a consortium and so on of scientists coming from different backgrounds. What we need to remember when it comes to data analytics, AI, data management, and so on, is that everything that is presenting now, has been presented in the introduction, and will be presented today, has a background, and it relies on something upstream. So someone else developed something that you need to inherit, and there's something that you need to deliver to someone else, whether that's a research output, a data point, a report, a publication, and so on. So everything is interconnected. So how we deal and how we manage all of these things is very significant because clear understanding and communication is required by all players and actors. So in practice, what you will see today by the 4 speakers is that one substrate, the data, how it's been produced, how it needs to be handled, and how we can maximize its value based on the tools that are available to us and based on the processes that are available to us. And one thing to remember is that although in many cases in scientific research we don't remember about it, governance is a key thing and needs to be applied in the same way as it could be applied, let's say, internally in an organization or, let's say, in a private company and so on. Because governance is the key, that all the rest of us will come together and governing the data, governing the tools, governing the outputs will ensure that you maximize the value of your data. So one thing to remember is that, let's say, when you are in a multi-partner project, you have many people coming together from different backgrounds that have a different mindset, different education, and use different tools. And most importantly, they use different nomenclature. In practice, the naming conventions may be different. The units that they use may be different based on the field of study, and of course, they will use different templates. So how big is that of a problem? Because when you have all these things, at the same time, you have different tools that may come from, let's say, proprietary formats that are not open. In many cases, you need to manually reformat things and so on. The licensing is an issue, whether you can or cannot reuse and how you can reuse an output and so on. And then eventually, when you bring all these things together, in many cases, it's hard to combine data. It's hard to compare the outputs. It's hard to reuse. And then, most importantly, when a project finishes, and after, for example, review meeting and so on, you don't really know how to follow up regarding reuse and so on. And actually, one thing we need to understand is that all these things actually apply to every project from every field and so on. It's just that like it's only, let's say, something that's only, let's say, exists only within our own, let's say, scientific space. Key thing is that data is a very living thing. Okay, so we have the data lifecycle here, and in any case, producing and exploiting of data more or less follows the same pattern. You plan something, you plan an experiment, a computational workflow, and so on that you would like to produce. Then you go into and define how you will acquire the data. You process the data, you clean it, you transform it, and so on. You go from raw data to process data that you can actually input into tools, analytical tools, AI tools, and so on. And then you perform the analysis, you get the results, and then you pass the data, the results to domain experts, to subject matter experts, that they actually go into the insights, and then we move towards data-driven decision making. But one thing that we need to remember is that in each step of the way, we have specific, let's say, players coming to the practice. You have the data creators, the PIs that actually guide the process. You have the technicians that capture the data and so on. Then you have the analysts that will take the data to process them and analyze them, or the modelers that will develop models, etc. And then all this needs to be passed to the data managers so that the data can be captured in a meaningful format and then actually uploaded into a database, verified based on the current requirements in major projects and so on, and then stored for the long term and maximize their value. But this step of the way, we actually need specific, let's say, types of metadata that need to be captured so that the person next in the chain that will take the data will understand what the data is about, how they came to be, what they represent, what the scope that they've been produced, and so on. And all these things come together as you go through the data life cycle, so as to create, let's say, a record of, let's say, of the entire, let's say, life cycle of the data that needs to be there so that people can actually use and reuse the data. And this actually leads to this small diagram of how we move from being data aware. So we go into a project, we all know that data will be produced, the data will have value and so on. But in many cases, we need to understand what this data is about, etc., and so on, and become data literate. So we know that the project will produce these types of data in this way from these people, okay, and for this purpose. And when we do that, when we become data literate and so on, we become data informed and we understand the value of data. We understand how the data will be exploited and so on, and eventually we will pick the correct algorithms, the correct tools and models to exploit the data and become data-driven. So we will produce, let's say, new products, new materials, new chemicals, new insights based on data-driven decision, based on high-quality data. But to achieve this, we will need to actually overcome specific criterion gaps that we see in research. And this is not a non-exhaustive list. In many cases, we have, as we said, fragmenting terminology and reporting. One project will use specific terms, the other project will use others, different templates, uploading to different repositories and so on. And all these things are how to come together, even within the same project in many cases. There is weak stewardship that leads to these results. So there are no clear rules and governance on how to actually manage the data and achieve this, etc. And eventually, we don't have provenance of the data, how they were created, in which version they are, and so on. And this leads to limited interoperability and reuse. And eventually, if you go down the chain of people actually accessing the data and the outputs, the trust erodes. So let's say the less information we have about the data and the outcomes of how these outcomes were produced, the less trust exists in this outcome. For this reason, the FAIR principles were developed. First, the FAIR data principles back in 2016 that we all have heard about. But in many cases, we know that they exist there, but we don't really know how to operationalize them. What the FAIR principles is all about is about data governance, guidelines. It's not a standard. It's a guidance on how to manage the data in a way that they have rich metadata that people can understand. You have machine actionability so that computers can go in and harvest data from different, let's say, resources like repositories and so on. And you have clear licensing for reuse. The formats are standardized so that people can easily access them without the need of specialized software and so on. But over time, this has evolved because we have come to the understanding that actually research outputs like AI model software and so on are also fall under this category. So the FAIR principles were firstly extended to actually cover the research software, so computation like tools that have been developed for research purpose and so on, and the computational workflows that in practice more or less map the provenance of the computational workflows and how this came to be. And this guidance actually also guide you in a way on the tools that you can use to apply this. And there are actually out there. There are many tools that you can operationalize fully the FAIR principles, but it's just an evolving process that people need to follow. But to achieve this, we need a very specific thing. We need to have proper governance. So we need to define the rules of how data will be managed and who owns the data, the accountability of who is responsible for delivering the data, the outputs, and so on. The people's, the roles, and the continuity of the data, so that then we can reach the data management and the actual technical solutions in operation tools and of course day-to-day practice. And this is our starting point. That what we want to more or less demonstrate, because to have a successful analysis, successful and responsible AI application, we need to bring the FAIR application into the output generation. Like from the very beginning, this needs to be defined based on experts that know about data governance, data stewardship, so that they can move to data management and full data exploitation. And actually provide the data producers, the researchers, the modelers, and so on with user-friendly tools that they can use from the very first minute that they start working with it. It's not, we should not expect people to learn new skills like coding or technical knowledge and so on so that they can actually develop or use tools that should be there for them to make their life easier and not harder, and allow them to verify things and manage data based on solutions that are already there, user-friendly, and they can easily use. And just tell them what they need to provide, like the provenance of their data, the history of their data and models, the licensing, and so on. And this actually will bring it to the correct output. And this is more or less how we work in Desiderata, where our workflow has been developed actually to accommodate for this. In practice, we have the different our data sources, and we have we validate the data from the data that have been produced using subject matter expert in specific workflows. And at the same time, we have predefined the metadata schema that we use in Desiderata and the metadata that need to be captured and verify everything, both data and metadata, closer to the point of creation. And of course, the job does not end here because it's never, as we said, it's an ongoing process. And when the data are imported into our in the Desiderata database that's hosted by us in the FAROS database, in practice we have an automated data structure and harmonization, but at the same time we capture the metadata and we use FAIR and machine actionable metadata and publications to publish the metadata. which become automatically publicly available even when the data are locked because of embargo, because they're sensitive and so on. And then this is how we maximize the added value and impact for all stakeholders involved. And in practice, how we approach it from the very...
to go.
Yes, I know. It's the second to last slide, and you just lost me a few seconds. So how we go about this is that from the very beginning, when the student, the underlying, let's say, background of the people involved in the project, with understanding the data and the gaps that come with it, the dependencies of the data, and so on. And then we're responding by developing a fair by default workflow. And as we go along, we have retrospectives where we actually understand, let's say, the background, what needs to be corrected, and then we also use the tools that are already there to actually fill the gaps. And in practice, all this apply, the same approach applies to both data, computational workflows, and tools. And this is what we need to remember, that we need governance and stewardship to achieve proper data management, so that we actually have trustworthy outputs and tools, because it's not about the output. A model will give you an output, and an analysis will give you an output. It's about what's around it, the metadata that will actually demonstrate the quality and actually increase trust in the outputs. And based on this, I would like to pass the floor to my co-presenters, Barry from Edelweiss Connect, that will talk about evidence-based workflows. So how he applies all of these principles so to develop evidence-based workflows, following by Vince from PDC, that will tell you about the models and their reliability and how all this is connected to high-quality data and processes. And of course, Alvaro that will talk to you about specific data gaps in analysis, gathering, and reliability. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Tassis, for your presentation. So, Barry, it's your turn.
Well, hello, everyone, to our discussion in this interesting session. I'm going to concentrate on using all the valuable data and knowledge we have in terms of how we organize it into evidence-based workflows supporting product innovation, development, and marketing. This is from some writing of mine from last weekend, and a reflection I wanted to share, which in a sense also tries to point out there is a limit in the knowledge we can capture, which includes our data and information. And it's not the same thing as understanding, and the understanding we build up over time, both individually and as a community, is also something that is different, which I call wisdom here. And trust is often in the gardener who tends the garden and the results that come from it. So we can't separate our databases and our knowledge bases from that, is one point I want to make. There is a limit in the knowledge towers we can build. So that should be part of our community-based sustainability. We had a community-based workshop across stakeholders a couple of years ago, and there's this article out from earlier this spring. And one message I had there was on the importance of the use of fair data and fair knowledge supporting AI-assisted applications. And I think that was adopted quite strongly across the group in the recommendations from this article. So how do we go about it? Well, there's a lot of hard work organizing data, as we're discussing about in this session. But there are other things we need to do. We need to document our thinking behind the experiments, our approach to developing the models. What are the uncertainties? How do we deal with conflicting evidence? And so there's a lot of additional kind of knowledge we need to take into account. And as AI assists us with this, we should really consider that in our design of AI that really does support important human activities like learning and discussion and judgment, and in the end, making better decisions. Principles then become important. So in the original OpenTalks framework article from now 16 years ago, you'll see that I mentioned collaboration in our title, and anticipating, even if we were making recommendations on having a common language supported by semantic web principles like interoperability and harmonized metadata. In the end, it's a collaborative effort that we need to support. So we worked on a preprint, which we put out a couple of months ago to try to update this framework article. And it's part of the learning we've had in the field of especially new approach methods and risk assessment over the last 15 years, but also trying to extend the principles to our increasing use of artificial intelligence. So what are the principles we should keep in mind when we both design and use these systems? And of course, this needs to be implemented in practice. This knowledge infrastructure was developed in the context of European projects, EU Tox Risk and now Risk Hunter, supporting goals in use of new approach methods in risk assessment. And as you see, of course, we're building sustainable data repositories like we have, for example, in biostudies that can be sustained as a European resource over a longer time, but also quite a lot of effort in documenting how is that data generated, what does it mean, how do we analyze it, and so forth. And of course, this should support innovation. Based on that work, we had 4 submissions to the EU Innovation Radar last year, which are registered on these links. As you see, it includes, of course, databases, but also that knowledge infrastructure, taking that knowledge infrastructure into supporting multi-stakeholder solutions like we do on Safer World by Design, documenting methods like in the ToxStamp and documenting workflows as in the ASPA-based approach. ToxStamp is about documenting at different levels of depth as you develop a method and having it reviewed, and when data then is uploaded to a repository, having it linked to that detailed method description. ASPA is about documenting the workflow you follow in a structured way, given a particular problem formulation to get to a decision. Workflows cannot document everything we do as humans in our decision making. So when we have complex situations, this may not necessarily be a workflow, but we can still document our discussions and our decisions. And this may be tiered, it may be iterative, but it should be structured, and all data and knowledge supporting any particular task and decision point should be included. So if we have a case study, the idea would be everything you did from the start in defining your problem to reaching an end decision would be documented in the workflow. And AI can assist us then when we define such a workflow. Today, it can be quite effective in helping us say curate data or complete templates and help us in documentation, background research, but it does not replace our thinking out those tasks and our understanding of those results. The implementation needs to be computational. Again, it should be a well-documented, reproducible, versioned computational infrastructure that implements a particular workflow. This example is one we've implemented in a couple of our current SSBD projects like Biophenom and SSBD for Chem for the hazard characterization workflow. When you get into materials, we need a different kind of knowledge infrastructure. So principles may be the same, but there may be variations we need to take into account. You can't just take the knowledge infrastructure from one area of science like chemical risk assessment and have it work for advanced materials characterization. So in this case, under the Accords project, this is a new knowledge infrastructure we've produced, and we have a couple of webinars on this month. Organizing knowledge and bringing it together, supporting our data analysis, taking into account what is the current knowledge on our problem, what are the conflicting evidence, is also an important activity and quite time-consuming to do this manually. So we built a a resource which is AI assisted, but with human interaction, to take existing knowledge, like one might have on adverse outcome pathways, and build a knowledge graph across the network of knowledge. And this has a workflow itself, which needs to be well defined. So you're very clear where all the evidence you chose to use to include your model before you do your data analysis against it came from. And such knowledge and data needs to be brought into the context of end user software, where end users are either doing scientific analysis, in this case, like a risk assessment, or a safer or sustainable by design decision, which we've been currently working on this software in our SSBD projects. I talked about in the regulatory session at the ANTOS conference in April, and that's shared here, about various practices we would need, like discussed here, and additional ones like documenting in silico protocols and models, so we can move more towards an evidence-based generation approach. This is important for the future regulatory acceptance of new frameworks like we're developing under SSBD. This, of course, also needs to be applied in industry and the tiered way needs the map supported by the fair knowledge infrastructure and the workflow engines to tiered decision making in product innovation at an early stage, and needs to be as simple and straightforward as possible. So to sum up, the different aspects of bringing data and knowledge together into workflows and graphs, providing that information into end user tools, including conflicting information, are essential parts of the combined aspects we need to bring together for good decision making. Finally, something I'm currently working on, in my opinion, I think current AI, despite everything it can do for us, and I use it every day, is very limited, and the AI of the future is going to be very different. So I'm trying to capture the principles of this in a current article I'm writing, which I'll share. In addition to those OpenTalks principles, there are a lot of additional principles I think are needed, which include some of the topics I'm talking about here, such as wisdom and service and collaboration. So to finish up, we're on a pathway always when we generate data from science, when we build models, we need to sustain those resources so that other people understand the results, but also to continue to have that integrated in our ongoing wisdom and curiosity and our service to the others who will build upon our work. And there are aspects of that such as judgment and service and interpretation are what I consider are essential aspects of the wisdom we need. And thanking the European Commission for funding on several projects related to this work, including Biophenom, Accords, SSBD for Chem, and Risk Hunter, and originally OpenTalks. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Barry, for a very complete presentation. We can go to the next presentation from Vincio from PDC and the bythe project. So Vince, the floor is yours. You can put it in presentation mode.
Yeah, welcome. My name is Vince Hop from Process Design Center. And Process Design Center is an engineering club which is 39 years in business, and we are focusing a lot on process development, techno-economic studies, and also LCA nowadays. And that means that we are very reliable on data from other partners. Basically, we need the data to do our designs, do our work, and therefore we need data in a structured way, because otherwise it's very difficult to make some sense out of it. One of our core technologies that we use for our process design is prosyn.ai, which is an AI software that is enhanced with large language models at this moment. And it's built on 40 years of experience and in collaboration with the Dortmund University back in the days. And it's expert AI system at this stage. We have a lot of modules to choose different equipment types based on rules set in the framework. So that's a bit how we operate and how we use data and do our designs. PDC is part of Byring. Andrea already mentioned in the beginning that Byring is one of the co-organizers of this entire webinar. And what we do in Byring is to improve the overall project outcome by applying data analytics and digital technologies, so that we design the individual process steps in a safe and sustainable way. And next to that, we also try to get a cost-effective outcome of this project, so that we get the best out of Byring and hopefully get a successful project in the end, which is also economically feasible and could potentially lead to more in the future. So how are we going to work? So basically, the process development requires a lot of information and selection criteria. So basically, we need to select which reactor we're going to use, what optimization steps we're going to do, what the environmental impact is, what can we recycle, how do we do separation trains, and how will it economically look like in the end. And for that, we need a lot of data. We get data from literature sources, which are often not always reliable because some articles are contradicting to each other, or you rely on other people's experiences and methods, how they do it. We can ask partners to do experimental work, but that's very time consuming, and often there are not the right analytical equipment available to get the data that we want. We can make assumptions, or we model certain parameters in this case to come to the right outcome. So for an example of a bio-based chemical, and we want to know the boiling point. We can do it experimentally, like I mentioned already. It's very labor intensive. It's costly because it costs materials, it costs hours of your employees, and it takes time because often experiments take a few hours. You have to wait for the analytical equipment to finish. For example, an HPLC can take a few hours to give you a final result, and then you have to do some data analytics to transform your spectrums into physical data. But if done properly, it gives very reliable results. So this one is preferably the method if you want the most reliable results, if you have the time and the money to do this, and the personnel, of course. Literature, it can be very time consuming because if you type into Google any search, you get like 1,000 results. And what is then the best source that you need? What is reliable, how and what? So every source needs some verification. So you have to dive really into the methods if you're going to use the data to see if they performed experiments or modeling properly. But this is cheap, and if done well, it can also be reliable because it doesn't cost any chemicals and it only costs labor, so time in this case. But if the proper verification is done, it's also a reliable result. So this is also one of the options. And another option is modeling. However, modeling is mostly assumption-based because you use some models to estimate certain parameters that you can use, or to estimate the boiling point. For example, you have the UNIVAC that you can use to estimate the boiling point. However, this is based on assumptions, and you always neglect some parameters. And it can be very hard to implement because most of the times you need some coding or software that you need to use. Software can be very expensive. For example, an Aspen license costs like a few €1,000s a year. So that's also not very convenient for companies who just want to know one parameter. But if you have the model available, it can save a lot of time because it's just one push on a button and you theoretically have a result. Now, as Process Design Center, we do a lot of modeling. So I will go on with this example from the modeling point of view. And then you have multiple possibilities for modeling. You can do statistical modeling, some regression and correlations. This is all based on available experimental data. So you have to again get some data points from either literature or experiments. You have some supervised learning like random forest models or gradient boosting, unsupervised learning like principal component analysis or clustering methods, forecasting like neural networks or moving averages, and rule-based modeling, which is basically our ProSyn.ai software. It's all based on decision trees or large language models, and they are basically set in a framework with some certain boundaries and rules that you go through. The last one is very reliable. So it's very reliant on how it's implemented. So if it's not implemented properly, it can also give you wrong answers. Same with large language model. If you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right answers. So that's a bit the different models that you can use to assume a certain parameter in this case. But let's say our model comes out with 180 degrees Celsius. This results in 150 kilowatts per ton of heating, coming to €3 per ton of heating cost in total. These are just all assumption cases. This is not based on real life process data or something, but this is just an example. However, when we are going to validate this with an experimental partner or someone who does the experiment, which is labor intensive, costly, and takes time, but we get the reliable result, we get 150 degrees as the boiling point. Then you think, no, those 30 degrees, it's okay, it cannot be that bad, but all this results in 125 kilowatts per ton of heating, which comes down to €2.5 per ton of heating cost. So if you have a large production facility of 1,000 tons per year, it saves already quite a lot of money in the end, and therefore it may become more economically viable as a bio-based chemical to replace its fossil counterpart. So this is more to create like awareness that modeling can be fast and gives you quite easy results, but that you always have to be very careful with how the results come out, and that you always have some kind of validation. Only the validation can be very time consuming, and in this case it's a boiling point, so everybody can do those measurements when you have a lab available. But when it's about vapor pressure data or any other parameters that you cannot measure so easily, it becomes more significantly and also more costly. So how does PDC tackle this misinformation? I call this on purposely misinformation because it can trick a user who's not double checking his own results, that it can result in misinformation or very bad designs in this case. Our first point of reference is always that the partners provide information. If the partners can provide information, then that's the most reliable source that we have, because it's the partner who comes with these results. So we assume that they did their work properly because it's in their own interest. Then we're going to search in PDC's trusted databases, which are built over 40 years. And we only put components in that database that we double check and that we know that the source is reliable. So that's one thing. It's a large physical property database. We do some literature review as a third option, but then we have to have preferably multiple sources that have a consistent value, and that the source is verified and the method is being reviewed. Because if you have multiple sources that are 10% different from each other, then it's still not a reliable parameter that you can use. And we also have our in-house physical property estimator, but this is based on models. So again, assumptions, and therefore an experimental verification is needed. So then again, you come back to someone has to do an experiment, because otherwise we don't know what we're giving the model. And the last one is to ask the partner to perform experiments, which is often very time consuming and costly. So that's a bit how we as PDC stand in this data environment. So how do we know if everything is reliable or not? And that's the biggest question that we always have when we do our process models or process designs. So some key takeaway messages that we have is a model is as reliable as its data source. Inaccurate data will result in wrong conclusions, so therefore always verify the source. Let a qualified / experienced user do the work, because bad input will result in wrong outcomes. And probably people heard this phrase before, is garbage in equals garbage out. If you have a non-qualified user operating a model and he don't know what he's doing, then you also don't get any trustworthy results, and basically your design is bad by beginning already. And assumptions are almost inevitable when you're modeling. So choose your model wisely. Good assumptions are a lifesaver in this case for designs, because if you use a model that is not suitable for high temperatures or is off at high temperatures, then you're not going to use that model for a process that has high temperatures. So that's also a thing that you need to take into account. And these are basically a bit how PDC works with data and how we do our design based on the data that we have available in this case. And that was my pitch basically.
Thanks for your nice presentation. We can go to the last speaker, that is Alvaro. So Alvaro, you can take the floor.
Hello, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Alvaro Ojeda. I belong to itinerary.ai. That is a research and technology center focused on the application of artificial intelligence into the industry. And I belong to the Energy and Industry 5.0 division as project coordinator. I am the project coordinator of the Data for Zero project. As you know, is a data-driven AI-assisted digital framework for enhancing circularity manufacturing. In order to complement the presentation of the previous colleagues, I am going to focus on 3 specific data gaps in 3 different fields regarding the use of this data to produce models. I am going to do in a practical way based on the challenges that we have detected in the Data for Zero project, and also the tools and methodologies that we are implementing to face these challenges. So the first data gap is related to the data analysis, concretely the data scarcity. As you know, this is a typical challenge in every research project, and the common risk that we can see as the materialization of these data gaps is the limited availability of real data in the early stage of the project that can delay the design, development, testing, and validation of data-driven solutions. This risk also have an impact with other different issues, such as the overfitting and poor generalization, amplified bias and lack of representativeness, statistical insignificance and low confidence, restricted algorithm choice, and increased project costs and time delays. Basically, if we have biased data, we will have a biased model, because we have only a low level of data that only represent a part of the system, and a complete representation of the system cannot be done with the model. This also conditionate the decision related to the algorithms can be applied, and if we need to collect more data, this is time consuming and more expensive. So as a result, the performance of these models is poor. The mitigation action that we propose is the synthetic data generation. This conceived as a pipeline in order to emulate realistic data flows and operational patterns that enable the validation, testing, and optimization of data-driven solutions in the meantime that we obtain real-world data. In this pipeline, 4 stages are the most common ones, so we are going to see this in a practical way. The first is data research, basically search for representative data in literature, public data sets, etc., in order to extract the value missing patterns and statistical distributions. This data will be used to the second phase, that is the model selection and training. Based on the type of data, we are going to use different type of AI models, that is the most extended version of this type of synthetic data generation pipelines. And if the data is tabular, we are going to use artificial neural network probably. In case of structured data, we are going to use diffusion models or generative adversarial networks. In the case of text, we are going to use large language models. After that, we are going to move to the sampling and generation. Basically, we are going to run the model and obtain synthetic or artificial data points that replicate the real world distributions. And finally, we are going to produce a validation comparing the synthetic data population and the real world data. Okay, finally, as I said before, machine learning is the more advanced solution in this pipeline, but other simpler and more traditional approaches can be used, such as rule-based systems and parametric statistical modeling. In those cases, the extraction of the capture of complex relationships is more difficult, and they usually are not scalable. Okay, the benefits: overcoming data scarcity, privacy and regulatory compliance, cost-effective documentation, and balancing rare edge cases. In contrast, this approach has also some limitations: the garbage in and garbage out problem that was commented in the previous presentation, the lack of novelty, the risks of model collapse, and overfitting. Okay, apart of that, we have some other data gaps related to data gathering and reporting. So we are going to focus on reporting. The common risk of this data gap is that we have heterogeneous ET landscapes in the different industries, test environments. So we have different technologies, file formats, naming convention, and inter-file links. And this complicates the creation of a common knowledge base. Derived from that, we have the following issues: exponential increase in data preprocessing, semantic misalignment and false correlations, broken inter-file links and data fragmentation, several spatial and temporal mismatches, and high risk of human error during the manual mapping. In summary, if we have different data sets in different points of the value chain, in the same process of the industry that we are going to model, and each data sets are produced with different frequency, different units of measurements. When we try to combine all of this data in a single data set, so to train or develop a model, this is a mess. So even if we have the intervention of a human operator, it could be also worse because some other bias can be introduced. So at the end, merging of the datasets can be a problem, and we cannot train an algorithm with different perspectives of the datasets. So the mitigation action that we propose is the development of a modern data engineering tool that they are digital threads and consistent data structure that will improve the semantic and structural interoperability of reported data, integrating data ingestion and validation. How this digital threads works. So here we can see a scheme of the digital threads in Data Forensic project that we can see in the middle of the figure. The digital thread includes different digital fibers that are connected with each of the processes that are the data sources, and they are different steps, in our case, of the value chain in the physical layer. Okay, and this digital fiber includes a data validation pipeline that ingests the data and processes them to finally serve this data to another tool, in our case digital twins, but can be other ones. This data validation pipeline comprises the data ingestion, data validation. This here we can see some of the validation that we do in the pipeline, the data normalization, the data emission, that is the provision of the data to other tools, and the metadata tagging, because in all the data process that we perform over the data, we will register them in order to increase traceability. Finally, the benefits of this approach is the composability and dynamic scalability, the end-to-end traceability and governance, the data processing and validation, and the system agnostic. In contrast, we see the following limitations: the upfront implementation and cost and complexity, the increased cybersecurity and privacy attack surface, legacy system incompatibility, and maintenance overhead. Okay, Finally, the last data gap that we have detected is regarding data governance, which is lack of data sharing. So in the industry sector especially, there is a high reluctance to share data with other companies due to the strict data governance policies that each company has, because they are wondering about what is the potential misuse of the data can be done with this data. So these have a derivative issue, that is the siloed insights. This is proportionate bureaucracy to reach time ratio, broken inter-file links and data fragmentation, and loss of replicability. It is more or less similar at the previous data gap, but at a major scale, because each company has his data, and it is a very difficult task to try to go company by company to extract those data and homogenize them. So this data sharing cannot be done. So the mitigation action is to develop a secure federated data space with based on zero trust security principles in order to provide a safe environment for the secure data sharing. This will be materialized with data contracts that will facilitate the continuous flow of information. Okay, I would like to clarify that federated data spaces are not a warehouse. Indeed, the data in this federated data space governs data exchange by following the principle of data sovereignty by design. So the data is always remain in the same company, and they only control the shared policies of the data. The data sharing steps are three. The discover. The data consumer will query the shared data catalog to find the relevant data sets. The negotiation, in which the data consumer will contact with the connector of the data provider, and they digitally negotiate the access based on some usage policies. And finally, if this governance requirement is met, the data transfer is produced between the two connectors. This is a scheme to exemplify and illustrate this process, okay, in which we can see different participants that have access to the shared data catalog. We can see how the connectors can connect to other connectors and exchange this data if the data governance policies are met. Okay, finally, the benefits of this approach is the absolute data sovereignty and control, the inherent regulatory compliance, eliminate data publication and storage costs, and scalability and ecosystem agility. Regarding the limitations, we would like to highlight the high reliance on standardized metadata ontologies, the performance and network bottlenecks, the lowest common denominator infrastructure problem, and the complex distributed security and monitoring. Okay, and in order to finalize, this is the graphical abstract of how these data gaps are addressed in the Data4Sig project. Basically, we distinguish two types of intelligence: a collaborative intelligence that is more related to the data space level, in which the share of information will allow to perform activities calculation at the value chain level, the environmental impact, the traceability, the shared information with the digital product passport. Is more a collaborative circular approach. And the local intelligence, that the provision of this data at the local level, at the industry level, at the company level, will provide information to conduct and train, execute and train digital twins, digital threads, and other type of applications in the sector. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alvaro, for your very complete example on a data framework, a complete data framework. So thanks a lot.